Hello, everybody. I was there for 30 seconds straight with the Locals channel. Yeah. So, real quick, to all you aspiring people who are looking to start their own channel, try to keep any supernatural entities from hacking into your account. Boy, howdy, that'll cause trouble, won't it? I swear the other day the PS4, cursed at me. Something about being a lazy writer. I don't know. Anyway, though. Hi, Mom. Hi, Sean. Yep. We're back from one side to the other. My friend Jesus is not here with us tonight. Him, the bishop, are both kind of recovering over sickness, so you're going to have to bear with them.
Yeah.
You okay over there?
Yeah.
Good. But I'm here, and I'm okay, because I'm always okay. Nurses don't get sick. I say, what is that noise? Anyway, they probably couldn't hear that, so they're like, what is he talking about? But anyway, hello, Mr. Bishop. Yeah, we're back. Tonight we're going to be discussing some of our favorite things from the Lovecraftian mythos. A quick disclaimer. I'm going to try really hard not to, first of all, go into any rants, because I'd hate for the bishop to have to time me again. And two, we're going to try and mostly go over the actual stories that were written and stuff like that, and creatures and characters from the mythos. Not so much the people that kind of surrounded him, even though there is one controversial figure we're going to have to talk about. So the thing about Lovecraft is that his mythos was both smaller and bigger than a lot of people understand or realize. And what I mean by that is it's kind of the George Lucas effect. So everyone knows Star Wars. There's thousands of planets and races and events that happen in Star Wars, right? Not as far as Lucas is concerned. He made 6 movies. That's it. Everything else is extended and was added in by other writers, game developers, etc., etc. The actual Star Wars that Lucas himself was involved with is kind of minuscule compared to everything else. And Lovecraft is very similar in that regard. If I recall correctly, and I'm not going to look on my notes because I know I didn't write it down, Lovecraft is only attributed to having penned somewhere between 50 to 70 short stories. Now, if you count the parts of some of his stories, then it gets probably closer to 100. For example, Call of Cthulhu, Dunwich Horror, Thing on the Doorstep, The Reanimator, Mountains of Madness. These are all stories that were actually multiple short stories. Hi, Connie. Because Lovecraft was kind of a genius. He wrote for magazines, and this was his only source of income. As I mentioned previously when we discussed him, he had a lot of things going against him. It's my personal opinion that he had a low form of autism. He was incredibly stunted from growth. He had poor social interactions. It's kind of funny. Today, we always talk about he was such a stoic, mean, unfriendly person, and yet he was surrounded by these people who swore he was the nicest, kindest, most wonderful man they'd ever met. Which is funny because everyone compares him to Edgar Allan Poe, who was the exact opposite. Poe was surrounded by these people who all said he was an asshole and didn't like him, but they acknowledged his abilities and his talent. Lovecraft was the exact opposite, and it's funny because today we see it yet again. They're flip-flopped. Everyone loves Edgar Allan Poe today, and thanks to sources such as Reddit and Facebook, a lot of people think they hate H.P. Lovecraft when the truth of the matter is they couldn't even tell you what his cats were named. And yes, that was a dig at Reddit. You can go below me for all I care. Anyway, but the thing is that he actually had this very loyal following of friends who they tried to preserve his writings. Some of them were a bit more controversial than others, and we'll actually have to discuss him in a little bit. But after his death, they started something called Arkham Publishing, which was a little printing press. They basically bought a printing press, one machine, to replicate and mass produce his writings, because most of his stuff was in little magazines. Worse yet, in order to ensure he had an income, he would take his stories and break them into parts and sell them month to month to various publishers, such as Weird Tales. And the idea basically was, well, okay, he has the Call of Cthulhu. Call of Cthulhu is like, I want to say, off the top of my head, 8 parts. There's some nerd on Facebook that's like, it's 9 actually. Yeah, go, fuck you. Anyway, though. And so when he sold Weird Tales, the Call of Cthulhu Part 1, he ensured that, well, obviously, if they get Part 1, they have to get Part 2. And then they have to get Part 3, and so on. There you go. That was a guaranteed income for the next 8 to 9 months. Because obviously you need the whole story. And that's why some people argue that he wasn't a short horror writer. He was a anthologist or a noveletist, which is to say he wrote short books. Because, yeah, the Call of Cthulhu, Mountains of Madness, Dunwich Horror, those are all basically books. They're just books with, like, a dozen chapters. But he was very good at world building. A lot of people, I hear this complaint a lot about how they didn't like how he wrote. He wrote in a very Shakespearean or biblical way, which is fitting because his 2 biggest inspirations were the Arabian Nights, which we discussed before, and the Bible. Even though he himself was a atheist, or at the very least agnostic, it's funny, he always talked bad about religion. And if you notice in his stories, religious people are always the villains. The cultists are always the bad guys. But he always said that there are 2 books every person in the civilized world should read. The Arabian Nights and the Bible. Not because of the accuracy of what's in them, but the way that they're written is so elegant and so perfectly crafted that is how you write a book, in his opinion. Whether it's true or not doesn't matter. That wasn't the point. But anyway, and so his work was very scattered. Supposedly he was also very bad at taking notes. And actually, we can show an example of that in a little bit. But he left a huge crater in his wake because, one, nobody was on his level. There were no talents of his caliber. And the funny thing is everyone admitted it. At the time, everyone was like, no one's on par with him. August Derthler? Nope. Frank Long? Not a chance. And so rather than just carry on, they were like, we have to gather his work, we have to preserve it, which is only made more difficult because his mother, after his passing, went completely berserk and destroyed tons of his writings, including supposedly all of his comedy writing. Most people don't realize this. Lovecraft actually greatly enjoyed writing comic strips, like not literally drawing them out, but like the script for comics. And sometimes he'd even include characters from his mythos, like Cthulhu. But he was so afraid people wouldn't take him seriously, he always hid his comedy writings. But anyway, and so what's sometimes referred to as the Lovecraft Circle came about, and they formed Arkham Publishing because a lot of publishers in the late 1930s, early 1940s, when Lovecraft died, there was a stigma that, weird fiction was, you know, those bundles of sticks, let's put it that way. They're the ones who like those kind of stories. You know, it's kind of ironic that Lovecraft is so remembered as being such a bigot, and he was in his younger years. No one talks about how he denounced his own bigotries and actually became an activist for, you know, immigrants and stuff like that, but that's beside the point. Ironically, someone who is, labeled a bigot so much, a lot of his work was turned down because of being afraid of being associated with certain types of people. Just kind of comedic. But anyway, fortunately, Arkham Publishing was very good at what they did. They were able to preserve lots of his work, and as again, he's a bit of a controversial figure, but we actually have August Derleth to thank for that. He was the big money behind Arkham Publishing, which is ironic because a lot of people who know about Lovecraft, they don't have nice things to say about August. And unfortunately, we have to bring him up because the first creature, the first thing in the mythos, and I do mean that literally, that we're going to discuss is my personal favorite creature, the Bayaki, or the Bicky bird, as he are sometimes referred. Although, for the record, Bicky bird is an inaccurate pronunciation that is established. They are pronounced Biaki. Some people say Bayaki, but no, August Derleth said it's Biaki. They are also referred to as, sit down folks, this is going to take a minute, servants of he who is not to be named, star lizards, void steeds, winged things, that. That's actually another name for them, that. Void lizards, gizzard steeds. They have some weird names, but anyway. They are classified as a beast of burden within the mythos. And there is controversy about exactly what they are. So, the first appearance of one in the mythos was by H.P. Lovecraft in one of my favorite stories, The Festival. There's just one problem that a lot of people bring up. Oh, hi, Tara. My sister finally showed up. Anyway, in The Festival, he doesn't call them Biaki. He doesn't give the creature a name at all. He just calls it a monster. Now, August came in behind him and said, that's a Biaki. That's what they're called. Now, he claims that Lovecraft himself explained this to him. There's just one small problem. This was in a verbal description that Lovecraft gave him. There's no letter, there's no document where Lovecraft ever wrote down the name Biaki. He never said it himself. We only have August's word. And August is a bit of a controversial figure, and we'll explain that in a minute. But anyway, he claims that that's what they were supposed to be called. Now, the thing is, Lovecraft never mentions this creature beyond that. All the writings of Biaki come from August. The creature we see in the festival is never described as appearing again, which is odd because it is a very distinct appearing creature. Hold on a second here. Let me find the note on it. Here we go. I found my notes. Okay, so this is what Lovecraft describes the creature that became a Biaki is described as. A horde of tame, trained hybrid winged things that no sound eye could ever wholly grasp, or sound mind ever wholly remember. There flapped rhythmically a horde of tame, trained hybrid winged things, not altogether crow, nor mole, nor buzzard, nor ant, nor decomposing human being, but something I cannot and must not recall. That is the Byakhee in Lovecraft's words. So, real quick, something about how Lovecraft talked, and this is something that people try to use against him. He loved to paint not pictures. He would always use a comparison. Well, it was kind of like, but not entirely, a corpse. It was kind of like, but not entirely, a crow. This is a trick that horror writers will often use to kind of force the reader's mind to wander. Just enough that you plant this image yourself in your mind. This is specifically very powerful for cosmic horror or weird tales writers, because you're implying just enough that the person creates something in their own mind. And because of that, because they are creating the image in their mind, it is more cemented. And a lot of people will form a sort of fondness for the creature because it's how they picture. And that's why a lot of people, puritists with Lovecraft's work, will say you shouldn't draw Cthulhu, you shouldn't draw Byakhees, you shouldn't draw Migos and things like that, because the whole idea is that no two people are going to see the same creature. There should not be a default appearance for Cthulhu. Everyone should kind of have their own idea what he looks like. Even though, to be fair, there are certain very clear definitions to how he looks. See my previous live stream when we went on that. How long was that rant? 6 minutes?
Yeah.
That was my shortest rant. But anyway, according to August Derleth, that was a Byakhee. Lovecraft said that's what they were called. It is kind of weird that he never mentions this creature or anything like it again. Which is weird because Lovecraft was very protective of his own creations. He was very firm in writers shouldn't share, which some people try to use against him, but I'm going to play devil's advocate for a second here. I get it. I get Lovecraft's take on that. It's, you know, if you are a creator, you should make your own things. You shouldn't, you know, use other people's stuff, and you shouldn't be having other people use your stuff. Which is one of the big reasons that a lot of people don't like August. Because boy howdy. After Lovecraft's passing away, August, he took a lot of liberties, let's put it that way. He claimed to have lots of letters and conversations with Lovecraft. He claimed that they were very close friends. Other people from the time say that actually Lovecraft didn't like August all that much and saw him as a competition or a rival, not really as a friend. There were supposed stories of him and Frank Long, Lovecraft's apprentice, also having a lot of odds with each other. Interesting though, Long never accused August of anything. He never came out and said it, but a lot of people have the opinion that August Derleth was something of a parasite. He knew Lovecraft was very talented, and so he just kind of tried to stay as close to him as possible. And then when he was dead, he wrote a lot of, what would they call it, extended universe content. He wrote a lot of stories about things that Lovecraft wrote about, claiming that they were in respect to him and they were based off conversations he had. For example, Hastur the Unspeakable, which is a character actually created by Robert Chambers, who Lovecraft mentioned just as a nod, just as an homage to Chambers. Because remember, he didn't like to use other people's stuff. August, on the other hand, went and wrote out stories that implied that Cthulhu and Hastur were brothers. Something Lovecraft himself never said. Hastur is only mentioned in a couple of stories, and there again, he's only mentioned by name, and it's an homage, it was a nod to Lovecraft's favorite poet, Robert Chambers. A lot of people say that uh, the most wonderful thing that ever happened for August's career was that Lovecraft died. Um, of course, he always persisted that he idolized Lovecraft, and Lovecraft was his very dear friend. Uh, and it's kind of one of those, you gotta choose your opinions here, because whether you think he was an exploiter who used Lovecraft's name, because he actually published several books uh, claiming that he was a posthumous collaborator with H.P. Lovecraft, and a lot of people were like, Lovecraft had nothing to do with that book. I mean, you mentioned stuff that he wrote about, sure, but that's not him. And it kind of depends on how much of a purist you are, but at the same time, he did introduce a lot of cool stuff to the mythos. He gave a lot more character to things that otherwise had no description at all. Um, a big thing that people are actually bothered by with August and his Byakhee and his take on Hastur and so on. And I'm trying really hard not to go on a ramble, but I'm failing miserably. But a lot of people say that he was a betrayal in philosophy. August was a devout Christian. Lovecraft was a openly stated atheist, if not agnostic. And he was also a nihilist. Chambers wrote much more, I want to say Tolkienian style, more good against evil and good winning in the end. And a lot of people are like, that's not Lovecraft. Lovecraft was not about good and evil. Lovecraft was about bleakness. It was about being tiny in this vast cosmos. And so August and his iterations have kind of an uphill battle against the Lovecraftian loyalists. But thanks to him, we have the Byakhee and a lot of other things. And I personally love the Byakhees. August's description spans them out much more. They are semi-sentient. They're animals. And they are often used as a means of travel because they have a special gizzard bladder organ inside them that produces a fluid called space mead. Space mead is a drink, well, can be drunk, and it'll grant you temporary protection from the void of space, allowing for travel through space. This is all August, by the way, not Lovecraft. But yeah, you drink this eldritch griffin bug bird thing's gizzard juice, and the void vacuum of space won't crush you instantaneously. Chat disconnected? Okay, we're back. Everything good?
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway.
I didn't see anything.
Anyway, though. But, yeah, they're very closely tied to Hastur. And, lots of other introductions into the extended Lovecraftian mythos are tied to them, too. Fantasy Flight, a great game company who make the Call of Cthulhu and Arkham Horror and Eldritch Horror board games, they love Byakhee. They went and expanded even further. One of my favorite little caveat things, so every group of animals is a different name. Hyenas run in a clan or a cackle. Sharks move in a school or a shiver. Foxes move in a skulk. Byakhee move in a scheme. A scheme of Byakhee. Which I personally think is a cool name for a herd of animals. But anyway, they are one of my favorite critters in the entire mythos. And it's funny that I say that because even the term mythos, whether you like him or not, we owe to August. Even though he wanted to call it the Cthulhu mythos. And for a long time, that's what actually stuck. A lot of people didn't like this. They were like, No, it's Lovecraft's mythos. It's the Lovecraftian mythos. And they even accused August of trying to kind of push Lovecraft out of the way. Uh, they remember the character of Cthulhu more than its creator, Lovecraft. Because, again, he wanted to basically make a career off of just writing Lovecraft stuff. So, again, very controversial figure, which, again, I feel is a shame because I like the Byakhis. I like his iteration of Hastur. Not sure how much I care about Hastur being Cthulhu's brother. But it's not harmful. Now, personally, me, and I know I promised I wasn't going to ramble about the people around Lovecraft. We were going to talk about the creatures. But unfortunately, you can't talk about the Byakhi without August. My personal opinion is that if there was some nefarious reason that he was interacting, oh gosh, Sean. Yeah, they do kind of sound like the Tremors ass blasters, don't they? Now, if I recall correctly, Lovecraft mentions that they were four-legged. Ass blasters are two-legged, but still, yeah, I see it. If August was trying to subvert Lovecraft himself, I'm just gonna say it. He failed, and how? He failed spectacularly. And I would argue that his contributions to the mythos were overall good. So, as far as he and the Byakhi and all that stuff go, I would argue there's more good than bad. Plus, they're just a cool creature. Fun side note about the Byakhi before we move on to the next critter. There was a game company, I can't remember who they were, but they made a Cthulhu game called The Call of Cthulhu Darkest Corners of Earth. The original plan was that it would be the first of a trilogy. First one, of course, would be about Cthulhu. The second one would be about Hastur, and the third one would be about Yog-Sothoth. And in the second game, there actually existed some like prototype software showing a hypothetical prototype scene where you would actually get to fly around riding a Byakhi. Sadly, this media doesn't exist anymore. I remember seeing it years and years ago, but I have never been able to find it ever since. And the company that was making it, of course, doesn't exist anymore. To make matters worse, Call of Cthulhu Darkest Corners of Earth was kind of a buggy game made way back on the original Xbox, if I'm not mistaken. So good luck finding it. Legendarily, ports of it don't work. But yeah. But anyhow. But yeah, that would have been cool, getting to ride a Byakhi around. I don't know if I'd want to go into space, because I'm uncomfortable just going a few thousand feet in the air. I don't want to go into orbit. Yeah. Also, I'm not sure if I want to drink any fluid that comes from a not crow, not ant, not mole, not human corpse's gizzard. What even is a gizzard? Is that an actual thing, or is it just a term?
I'm not sure.
Hi, Dad. But anyhow, I still love the Byakhi. I think they're really cool. Again, I get it. August is a controversial figure. Some people don't like him. My personal opinion is that he's harmless. Even if he was trying to undermine Lovecraft, he failed miserably. And regardless of his personal intentions, he was a key factor in creating Arkham Publishing, which is the only reason we still have Lovecraft's work. So, I mean, accidentally doing good is still doing good, I think. This is one of those episodes people are going to find it like years from now when we're famous or something. Be like, he's an Auguster! And it's like, no. I just think he wasn't, the Judas, so to speak, of Lovecraft. Some people say that, but I think they're being a bit dramatic. But anyhow, we're going to move on to another very popular critter of Lovecraft's mythos. Ironically, maybe one of the most important, in my opinion. Even though they are another obscure one. It's kind of funny because, again, because I mentioned how Lovecraft actually didn't write that many stories. There are more Goosebumps than stories that Lovecraft wrote. Think about that for a minute. R.L. Stine has written more stories than H.P. Lovecraft. Even though I like Stine. I love Stine. He's awesome. But anyway, yeah, no. Pretty much all the staples of the Lovecraftian mythos, he only wrote about once or twice. Of course, again, that's not including extended stuff. The Fantasy Flight Company that we mentioned a minute ago, they love these creatures. They have them all over the damn place. And key side note real quick. These creatures are probably one of the most known. Like if you ask people about them, they know these creatures. They don't know what they're called. I noticed that. And that's because we never actually hear their name. We only get a description of them. I'm, of course, talking about the legendary Elder Things. The Elder Things are a race of aliens. Once again, unfortunately, we get kind of a weird description for them. They first appear in the Mountains of Madness, but they are also in Dreams of the Witch House, which is just a reference. They're not actually there. And The Shadow Out of Time, where again, they're mentioned by name. But the Elder Thing, let me see if I can find here we go. Lovecraft actually went into deep detail with this one. It's really kind of unusual. But in the context, this description came from the Mountains of Madness, which a lot of people say is the best Lovecraftian story. I'm personally torn because I can see it. I understand why people would say Mountains of Madness is the best. It's just not my personal favorite. It's great. Quick side note. Any Carpenter fans out there, if you haven't read The Mountains of Madness is basically The Thing, but like a prologue. It really actually does, it's kind of funny actually, it does kind of read like a prologue to The Thing, which by the way was the intent. Carpenter himself loved the works of Lovecraft and even stated that Lovecraft hands down was one of the most influential people in horror, and it is a crime that more people don't know his name. He said this back in like the 90s, by the way. But yeah, no, The Thing is and I would argue it's actually fairly faithful in its depiction. Well, not depiction, homage, I'd say. It's kind of in how it pays tribute to things like that. But anyway, when we get the description for the Elder Thing, it's actually in a note written down by a scientist, so that's why it's so detailed. But get a drink. You might have to go to the bathroom, whatever, because boy howdy, this one is a bit long. Ready? 6 feet end to end, 3 5/10 feet central diameter, tapering to 1 foot at each end, like a barrel with 5 bulging ridges in place of stabs. Literal breakages, as of thinnish stalks, are at equator in middle of these ridges. In furrows between the ridges are curious growths, combs or wings, that fold and spread out like a fan, which gives almost 7-foot wingspan. Arrangements remain in one of certain monsters of primordial myth, especially the fabled Elder Things in the Necronomicon. Okay. So we have a 6-foot tubular creature that has comb-like wings and has 5 sides to it. Now, that's the first description. The second description describes them a little bit more detailed. At the top and bottom of an elder thing are 5 very tiny appendages similar to a starfish. On the top of the creature, each of these limbs on the starfish head ends in an optical nerve, an eye. At the center of this starfish is a mouth, just like the real ones. The bottom of an elder thing does not have the eyes, and the starfish down there is you. Did you feel that? The ground shook. Anyway, sorry. The bottom starfish, quote unquote, is oddly strong and is able to hold up this entire creature and used as a means of walking. Now, this creature is arguably one of the most important things in the Lovecraftian mythos, because elder things accidentally are the progenitors of all life on Earth. In the Mountains of Madness, it's described that the elder things came to Earth basically because it was an unpopulated planet in a relatively good position to its sun to harbor life, so they could use the world as a field for their experimentations. They specifically experimented in genetics. One of the many things they created was the proto-Shaggoth and the Shaggoth, which were shape-shifting masses of flesh and fluid, for lack of a better term. Somewhere along these lines, one of their experiments got a little bit too advanced and escaped their research facilities, which were located in the polar regions, because they need it cold. Remember, they come from space. They need to be in the cold. Some of their biomaterial escaped and eventually began to evolve into reptiles, apes, mammals, and this one really obnoxious species of creatures who stand somewhere around between 5 to 7 feet tall, mostly bald, have opposable thumbs, and a unique respiratory system that allows them to run for extremely long lengths of time. But I'm sure these moronic creatures could never exist for very long. It's fine. It's nothing to worry about at all. What are you talking about? But anyway, it's kind of funny because Lovecraft himself actually wrote sympathetically for the Elder Things, which is weird because usually his non-humans are not good. Even if they don't seem that bad, they're at best apathetic, indifferent. But in the Mountains of Madness, he does write them more sympathetic, being more human-like. There's even a part in the Mountains of Madness where the narrator laments that the elder things they find, who are all dead, were scientists. They were researchers. They weren't alien invaders. They weren't hostile. They honestly were probably just as scared and confused about the situation that they went through as, the people currently in the Mountains of Madness went through. Which is to say, a Shaggoth got really ticked off. But anyway, in the Mountains of Madness, it's also explained that some of the Elder Things left Earth after the Shaggoths began to rebel and revolt and had this bad habit of killing them. But there was another group of Elder Things that hid in the bottom of the ocean, way, 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 way down. And Lovecraft speculates that they would have evolved and over time mutated into a whole new species. Though, strangely to my knowledge, he never really delves too much into that. Some people jokingly refer to these as the Deep Things, which is, of course, a nod to the Deep Ones that Lovecraft wrote about quite extensively. But, yeah, no. These guys are very important, and again, despite the fact they only have 3 appearances within the mythos that Lovecraft himself wrote, not only were they important because of the story aspect, the fact that they accidentally created human life, um, there's also the fact that a lot of people just ran with them. Lots of people who surrounded Lovecraft wrote about the Elder Things, and I personally think it's because of the fact that he made them the most human, if you, in a manner of speaking. He gave them very human motivations. They seem understandable compared to, like, well, how do you write about Cthulhu? You know what I mean? They're much more difficult to approach. So, yeah, the Elder Things are understandable. Fantasy Flight loves to mention them in all their games, but technologically speaking, they were super beyond anything humans have ever achieved. There's mention of them having energy-based weapons, so they have blasters. Um, a gizzard helps chickens. Uh-huh. Oh, hi, Jeebus. I hope you're getting better. And for the record, I didn't get lost last year. I was kidnapped. A lot of help you did then, too. But anyway. Yeah, like I said, they, again, were really picked up and ran with for a lot of different settings. I'm honestly kind of surprised that they didn't have some kind of cameo or reference in The Thing. But my personal guess is that Carpenter didn't want it to be a direct follow-up to Mountains of Madness, so maybe that would have been a little bit too much to have Elder Things, but that would have been cool. They were going to make a Mountains of Madness movie, headed by Tom Cruise, of all things. But that never materialized, even though supposedly there are trailers you can find online of it. You know, honestly, I'm torn because on the one hand, I would default and say, no, don't touch it. Don't make a movie of Mountain of Madness. At the same time, we have seen a spark of good films recently. So, like, maybe, possibly somewhere in Hollywood, there are some people who could, you know, do a decent adaptation. I just doubt it. You know what I mean? It's like, I don't trust Warner Brothers to do it. I don't trust, oh God, Disney. Could you imagine Disney's take? Disney's, The Mountain of Madness? I take that back. No, absolutely not. Anyone else can try. I'll take Blumhouse over Disney making frickin' H.P. Lovecrafts. No, Sean, I have not seen the film of Dagon. I'm afraid to, honestly. I've heard it's horribly not in keeping with the book. I like the book, Dagon. Well, not book, it's a short story, but still. Anyway, though, yeah, the Elder Things are very commonly referenced. Fun side note, Mountains of Madness is the first published time that the name Necronomicon gets used, too. Lovecraft had written about it before, but that was the first one that got published that used the name. Technically, the first time the Necronomicon is mentioned was actually in The Nameless City, a personal piece that Lovecraft wrote and never had published publicly. But anyway, back to my point. I love The Nameless City. It's my favorite story. Back to the Elder Things. In the Dunwich Horror, they're mentioned, but also their world is mentioned, too. It's not given a name, which is a shame, but it is described as a planet that rotates between 3 sons. And you thought it was bad on Tatooine. 3 sons. I don't even know how that would work. Well, I guess it doesn't really. But anyway. As I was saying, though. Yeah, it's funny because, again, there's not a lot of detail about their society or that stuff. But it's like they were massively important. I would argue they're the most important, not deity, god level beings. Because to get more important than them, you got to go into like the great old ones and stuff like that, who we'll discuss in a little bit. But no, as far as mortal creatures, the elder things are by far the most important. They're not my favorite. A lot of people jokingly refer to them as sea cucumbers, which I can see the similarity, but actually, now that I think about it, how big do sea cucumbers grow? Could they? They don't get very big. I'm just trying to picture a 6-foot long sea cucumber. Yes, the Necronomicon was mentioned in Evil Dead. Fun side note, technically it wasn't originally called that. They called it the Book of the Dead in the original Mountains of Madness, in the original Evil Dead, and they changed it to Necronomicon. But anyway, the Elder thing, yeah, they're the smallest big deal you could think of in the Lovecraftian mythos. Anyway, though. And again, I'm going to not go into other writers' stuff of it. We can talk about other writers at another time. I know, I went on about August, but I'm trying not to. Anyway, though, the next one we have is actually something Sean requested to talk about. It's not a creature, it's a story. And it's one of Lovecraft's favorites, personally. The Rats in the Walls. The Rats in the Walls are one of his earlier pieces. He wrote it in 1923. I almost said 2023. Anyway, though, in 1923, it was published next year in 24. And apparently it was one of his personal favorites, and a lot of people say it's one of their favorites. It doesn't actually have anything to do with the mythos, though. Nothing from the mythos is actually mentioned. There's no great old ones. There's no magic. Some people argue there is kind of magic talked about it, but it's one of his examples of what people called hereditary horror. Lovecraft, in his younger writings, loved to use the plot twists of ancestry, of finding something bad, if you get what I mean, on the family tree. And this is an example of that. One of the big reasons that people actually look down their nose at Lovecraft is because several stories, the big reveal at the ending was the discovery that, some character, his grandparents were of a mixed race relationship or something like that. Although, interestingly, the Rats in the Walls kind of takes that into reverse. I won't reveal it because, well, you should go read The Rats in the Walls. But, yeah, it's an interesting change on the heredity horror aspect that he loved to write about. And I want to point something out real quick. And this might be a bit of a spoiler. So, spoiler warning, I guess. They never confirm the rats. The main character complains about hearing them in the walls, but as I recall, and to be fair, it's been a little while since I read The Rat in the Wall, but as I recall, he never actually finds the rats. He finds something else in the walls. There is still time to fit in a 5e rant. No, Sean, we are not going to be doing that. And as much as I do like The Rats in the Walls, there's actually a behind the scenes thing that I think is kind of more interesting. So I mentioned before that one of the reasons I give a pass to August is because of the fact that without Arkham Publishing, we would have lost most of Lovecraft's work. There's no two ways about it. And part of it was because he was so awful at taking notes and keeping track of things. Supposedly, he absolutely worked in a rat's nest with notes everywhere. He would scribble things down on like napkins and stuff like that, and yeah, so it was very hard for him to keep focus and it was easy for him to lose things. Let's put it that way. Um, but we do have some behind the scenes information. Um, so allegedly, he actually wrote The Rats in the Wall as kind of a challenge. He was challenged to make a horror story out of a, quote, commonplace incident. Okay. He said, bring it on. What's this commonplace thing? What is a commonplace incident that he would write a story about? Hold on to your hats, because this one actually was like, I don't know how he got from this to The Rats in the Walls, but he pulled it off somehow. The cracking of wallpaper. You think I'm joking, but no. He was told, okay, here's your prompt. Wallpaper cracking. Make a horror story out of that. It's kind of funny to think, because houses don't have wallpaper that much anymore. I don't remember the last time I saw a house with wallpaper. Most places paint.
When's the last time you've been in a house?
You're not wrong, but still.
Most people can't even afford to rent a house anymore.
No. Sean, it's a story that's almost 100 years old. You can't give there can't be spoilers. I suppose that's true. Spoiling The Rats in the Walls would kind of be like spoiling the Iliad, right? It's like you either have read it or you're never going to at this point, but either way. And what's interesting is Lovecraft actually was on board with this. He actually really liked the idea. He even commented how the sound of wallpaper cracking at night would sometimes actually send him off on a, quote, chain of imaginings. Basically, his mind would wander at ideas, and because he would hear a noise at night, no, it was just the wallpaper cracking. But what's funny is we actually have some notes he took down, because when he was working on it, he made some notes. And I have two notes that he actually wrote down. First, and this was actually something he wrote to, I believe, Frank Long in a letter. He made mention of it. Wallpaper cracks off in sinister shapes. Man dies in fright. that was numero uno, first idea he had for The Rats in the Walls. Wallpaper cracks off in sinister shape. Man dies in fright. You know, that last part of the sentence there kind of just sums up Lovecraft's whole thing. Man dies in fright. But he did write a second one. He wrote a second note later. Horrible secret in crypt of ancient castle discovered by dweller. Those were his two notes that we know for a fact he penned down when he was working on The Rats in the Walls for ideas based off of the commonplace incident of wallpaper cracking, excuse me. Yeah, Sean brings a good point. If you can't get your hands on a book of Lovecraft, which you should absolutely get physical media, because as comforting as YouTube is, there are hypothetical situations where all of this is gone. Whereas this, will always be in my hands. I can, always get physical media. They can't edit or remove or block a book in your hand or a DVD in your collection or things like that. Um, Plus, I'm just going to say it, the old Lovecraftian books, the artwork on them just went so far. I love the artwork that guys like Barbara Humble actually did for the Lovecraftian books. But anyway, back to my point. So, yeah, the Rat in the Wall is a good example of, what were they working with at Arkham House when they were trying to preserve his work. It was like sorting out a rat's nest. He had notes that were like, seriously, if I told you the Rats in the Walls was based off wallpaper cracks off in a sinister shape, man dies in fright, you would have no idea I'm talking about the Rats in the Walls, because it becomes a completely different story. It goes way beyond that. Almost to the point, and I'll just put it out there, as far as using the prompt wallpaper cracking, as much as I love the Rats in the Walls, I'm not sure he succeeded that challenge in making a horror story about the wallpaper cracking. It's a great story, but yeah, I feel like he didn't use the prompt very well. He kind of went off on his own. Oh, good night, Dad. Yeah, Sean, no, absolutely. You should absolutely hope you can find a couple Lovecraft books at your local bookstore. I don't hugely endorse this, but ye old eBay, I'm sure you can find some books there. But no, absolutely, go to your local bookstore. Find a local bookstore. Don't buy online. Do it in hand. Support small businesses and all that stuff. But anyway, yeah, he really kind of went off the ball on that one with the Rats in the Walls, but it's still considered one of his best stories. A lot of people love it. See, I personally think it's all in how the twist at the end is revealed. Very abrupt, unapologetic, out of nowhere change that is actually well done. It's the kind of stuff M. Night Shyamalan thinks his movies are. I'm not a huge fan of the twist endings, which is funny because I love R.L. Stine, who believes that every horror story should have a twist ending. Although, to be fair, he usually uses his twist endings as kind of comedic. So, not the same thing. I can't stand Shyamalan. I really can't. And now his wife makes movies, apparently. So it's like the infection is spreading. We're going to have just a dozen Shyamalama ding-dongs out there making horrible movies with bad twist endings. Anyway, though. But yeah. The Rats in the Wall are a great story. And again, I wanted to talk about them, one, because Sean asked me to, and two, I wanted to use it as an example of how Lovecraft actually worked and how he wrote. He would do that a lot, actually, supposedly. He would kind of just go on tangents of just writing stuff down. He claimed he actually would write in his sleep, too. Which is kind of, sincerely sounds terrifying. You know what I mean? Could you imagine that? You go to bed and you just wake up at your desk and you realize you've been typing or something. Anyway, though. I've been putting this off. But okay. Fine. Let's head into the home stretch. Talking about him. The character that if I didn't talk about, everyone would be mad at me. the Lovecraftian character himself, not buff, not bald, by the way, but we'll get to that. Great Cthulhu. So, Cthulhu is... He kind of is Lovecraft's champion, his prized jewel, which is funny because... hold on here, let me see if I can actually... Where is his appearances? No. Here we go. He is the most mentioned character in the Lovecraftian mythos, though 9 times out of 10, it's literally just his name gets mentioned. Like, he's in, he'll be in lists, he'll be passingly mentioned. But, of course, obviously, his first appearance was in The Call of Cthulhu. But he is also mentioned in History of the Necronomicon, The Dunwich Horror, The Electric Executioner, The Mound, Medusa's Coil, The Whisperer in the Dark, At the Mountain of Madness, Shadow over Innsmouth, The Horror in the Museum, Through the Gates of the Silver Key, Winged Death. He is also mentioned in the collaborations that Lovecraft worked on, The Secrets of Kretz, The Invaders, The Terror from the Depths, and Strange Eons. And that's not even getting into what other people have written about with Great Cthulhu. He, hands down, is the most mentioned Lovecraftian creation, which, to be fair, makes him very distinct. Because you'll notice, I mentioned probably a quarter of everything Lovecraft wrote himself. So... yeah, whether he's overused or inaccurately described, Cthulhu is H.P. Lovecraft's champion. And it doesn't even come close. Which is funny because actually the more you learn about the whole mythos, the more you realize Cthulhu isn't actually that powerful. So as I mentioned last week, Cthulhu is a part of a collection, a sort of mini pantheon called the Great Old Ones. They are called this because they were the first pantheon on Earth. So basically, after the Elder Things came to Earth and started creating life accidentally, the Great Old Ones took notice and decided to go to Earth. And it is described that for a time, the Great Old Ones, led by Great Cthulhu, ruled over the Earth, and they used it as the site for hedonistic and sadistic rituals of blood, violence, and depravity that was so horrible that another pantheon called the Elder Gods literally turned, looked down, and were like, oh, you guys are... what is wrong? Why are you doing that? Why are there socks? The Elder Gods were disgusted by the actions of Great Cthulhu and his kin. Worse yet, it was discovered that Great Cthulhu himself was... how do I describe this? He was kind of the Darth Vader to a Emperor Palpatine character. Someone that is almost never mentioned, even though he, hands down, is the single most powerful and, you could argue, important character within the mythos. Azathoth. Azathoth is simultaneously the center of the universe and exists on the corners of the universe. A being so powerful that all of reality is essentially spawned from his overactive mind dreaming. The Elder Gods had to put him to sleep because he was so powerful that even the most brief, slight motion of his body would literally crush and annihilate massive portions of the universe entirely. And Great Cthulhu, ever seeking more violence, more depravity, more you know what, had the ambition to wake Azathoth up. So the elder gods had to put a stop to that because they keep all their stuff in the universe. There's a big important distinction I want to point out here, and this is another example of Lovecraft versus August. August liked to depict the elder gods more good. He even kind of hints that Jesus is an elder god. Versus Lovecraft, who went out of his way to explain the elder gods are not good. At best, the elder gods are apathetic. They are indifferent. They saved Earth and accidentally humans from the great old ones to save themselves, because they knew that if Cthulhu was able to perform those dread rituals and profane black magics and wake up Azathoth, that's it. Game over. Everybody loses. Except Cthulhu, who gets what he wants. The ultimate example of violence and hedonism. So, again, that's an example that a lot of people put against August, that there is no good in the Lovecraftian mythos, because the mythos isn't about good or evil. It's more about survival. Now, if you are inclined to a story of good and evil, that's perfectly fine. I, being a boundless optimist, I like good versus evil stories. But I'll also acknowledge that's not Lovecraft. Lovecraft was never about good or even bad. A lot of people like to say his stuff is all evil, edgelordy. No, I'd argue it's neutral. It's not good or bad. I mean, aside from Cthulhu himself, most of the great old ones are belligerent, unaware creatures that just basically hang out with Cthulhu. Another interesting thing is that the great old ones are truly unique. No two great old ones are actually the same species. There's all kinds of them. There's giant toads, giant slugs, there's a giant whale, actually. But my point is, the great old ones were actually aliens. Most people don't know this, but Cthulhu himself has a species. They're called starspawn. And actually, I have a funny story. DJ Scraps, who runs the channel Kobold's Corner and does the music and some of the audio for our videos, he one time was at a convention and he sat in on a game of, what was it? Was it Arkham Horror?
Was I there?
No,
Oh.
but
I don't know.
no, this was before he knew me or you, because he was literally like, no. So this dude, so he was playing, and basically they were playing a gauntlet style Arkham Horror, where basically people were coming in, taking up characters. If your character dies, you're out. Someone else steps in with a new character. And he stepped in at a very bad time. As he tells the story, his character dropped into the game with 9 star spawn in the same room as him. But he had 2 things going for him. A shotgun in his left hand and a bottle of liquid courage in the right. And so the liquid courage was basically allowing him to not take sanity rolls, basically, because that's how starspawn work. They're big and strong, yeah, but the worst thing is they're made of a form of matter that is completely alien to Earth. So even just looking at them, your brain can't comprehend what it's seeing, and it drives you insane. This is why you can't look at Cthulhu, because literally he is made of a form of matter that your mind can't understand. Some people say Lovecraft accidentally described plasma, the form of matter called plasma, when he was describing Cthulhu, kind of a mixture of gas and liquid. But anyway, so our boy DJ Scraps, he was just drinking the liquid courage, firing off his shotgun, and years later he tells me about this, and I'm like, 9 star spawn with a shotgun and a bottle of liquid courage. And he's like, yeah, that's how, yeah, it worked. His character almost immediately dropped dead after that, but he took down 9 star spawn, and I literally looked at him and go, star spawn. And he's like, yeah, whatever that is. And I was like, That's a Cthulhu. Cthulhu is a star spawn. And he was like, what? He literally was like, no way. It's like, yes way. Now, to be fair, the average star spawn, according to the works of Lovecraft, they're not that big. They're a little bit bigger than a human. They're kind of in that like elephant, gorilla size frame, large mammal. Cthulhu is a freak. He is a giant of an unmeasurable size, but that's because of the fact he has done such profane magic rituals to himself that he turned himself into this giant draconian looking monstrosity. Now, for those of you who weren't here last week, we're going to have a mini rant. In the Call of Cthulhu, which is the only physical description, every other time the Lovecraft mentions Cthulhu, it's just his name. The only story he is physically in is the Call of Cthulhu. Let me see if I can find the description. Here we go. I found it. Now, this is paraphrased, so bear with me. Lovecraft describes it as a grotesque giant, yielded simultaneous pictures of an octopus, a dragon, and a human caricature. A pulpy, tentacled head surmounted a grotesque, scaly body with rudimentary wings. He later goes on to describe it, representing a monster of vague anthropodic outline, with an octopus head whose face was a mass of feelers, a scaly, rubbery-looking body, prodigious claws in hind and forefoot, long, narrow wings behind. Now, some people disagree with me, but I'm going to state, nowhere in the Call of Cthulhu is he described as having six-pack abs or Hulk Hogan-style biceps. Okay? He is described as grotesque and rubbery and pulpy. Cthulhu is fat. Now, in another book, he is described as having a mane of tentacles. So I don't know why people always depict him having a bald top of his head. A mane, when you say mane to me, I think the whole head. But always they depict him gargly, like a beard of tentacles. So, 1, stop making Cthulhu jacked, and 2, give the poor thing some hair, okay? It's bad enough he has to be one of the most ugly creatures in all of reality. Do you have to make the poor bastard bald? Really? We can't give him some tentacles on his head? Yeah, Sean actually brings a good point. Everyone depicts Cthulhu as being this like stoic, methodical, deep-minded villain. No, he was a party animal, a reveler of blood orgies and madness. He was not stoic in the slightest. He was completely off his own rocker by Lovecraft's own description. The whole reason that he was imprisoned in Deepest Relay is literally because he was throwing blood orgies at the expense of a pathetic, newly formed human species, in the hopes of awakening Azathoth to just have the most violence possible imaginable happen. Yeah, I think it's funny. People depict Cthulhu, in my view, what they're really depicting is Lovecraft himself. Because Lovecraft was very aloof and quiet and withdrawn. He was the more stoic, in my opinion, than Cthulhu. But there are a few funny things. And I've mentioned this before on the channel. Lovecraft had the greatest response when people tried to insult the names and stuff he said. Um, this was actually supposedly a problem. And I've only seen one or two letters, but supposedly, yeah, Weird Magazine would get letters to the editor saying, hey, stop publishing that Lovecraft stuff. I can't stand those names. I don't know how you pronounce those names. Lovecraft formally responded, saying that the problem most people have with pronouncing Cthulhu is that the first step is to proceed with swallowing one's own tongue. I I don't care what your opinions of Lovecraft are. Going and printing out a formal response in a magazine telling someone who doesn't like how you write your character names to go and swallow their own tongue is one of the best fuck yous I have ever heard. People talk about, Deadpool's the best trash talker ever. Maybe. But I don't think he could top step one, swallow your tongue. Yeah, Sean brings a good point. Lovecraft and Tolkien. Oh, God, could you imagine an argument between those two guys? Tolkien, who didn't just write one mythological language, he wrote several languages. For the dwarves, for the elves, there was a special language that they spoke in Mordor, and how the orcs wrote things down when they bothered to write things down. And Lovecraft did very similar. There is what's considered the Lovecraftian language. Which again, he actually went and worked out how syllables would work. You could speak in the language of relay, which we get from the Call of Cthulhu. Now, I will admit, I don't know how it works. Like, I couldn't speak fluently in relay, again, because it was never intended to be spoken aloud. It was just supposed to be read and look very strange and scary and alien, so that it would be unsettling. But back to my point. So yeah, no, Cthulhu was not jacked. He was never described that way. There are some different stories that come of people talking to Lovecraft, people who claimed, well, not claim, but they did know him, and they say he described Cthulhu in more detail. For example, Gustav Johansson, who actually got name dropped in one of Lovecraft's stories. He was a friend of Lovecraft, and Lovecraft actually had him make a cameo. He claimed that Lovecraft described Cthulhu as a, quote, walking mountain, and having more of a squid-like head, with flabby claws, and being green and immensely gelatinous, which I think is actually where a lot of the more accurate Cthulhu depictions, that just doesn't sound fun to say, does it? Immensely gelatinous. See, I say it out loud, and my first thought is Jabba the Hutt.
Oh, yeah.
Immensely gelatinous.
He's like the leather bag.
But anyhow. But yeah, Lovecraft wrote about him a lot, and supposedly he actually was a reoccurring thing in Lovecraft's comedy writings, which unfortunately we'll never know. Thanks, bitch. But anyway, and everyone gets him wrong, and it just bothers me so damn much. Also, and I don't know where this comes from, but there's this odd misconception that Cthulhu was supposed to have tiny wings. Lovecraft never said that. He just mentions that, yeah, Cthulhu has wings. But for some reason, it became this trend when depicting Cthulhu to give him wings that are like disproportionately small compared to the rest of his body. I don't know how that became a thing. I don't know how him being jacked became a thing now that I really think about it. And for the record, by the way, some people will tell you that that was August who started the Buff Cthulhu theme. Good night, Mom. Sean. We have converted Sean. He likes the jiggly genocide. That's one way to describe Cthulhu. Rudimentary is kind of a weird way to describe wings. I think rudimentary is a weird way to use as a description for anything, which is why he uses it. Lovecraft, one of his pinnacle rules for writing horror, never speak plainly. Anytime you can use a big fancy $3 word, use it. I mean, hell, the only reason that eldritch is even a word is because he liked using it. And everyone else was like, the hell does eldritch mean? But yeah. And you know what's funnier too? Is everyone talks about how Lovecraft was a nihilist and he was so pessimistic and he was so depressed and all these things. And that's true. However, I feel that there is something, and I want to end this on this note. I think, in a way, the Call of Cthulhu, at least its ending, was Lovecraft's attempt at being positive. Here's what I mean. Now, it's a story that's almost 100 years old, but spoiler warning. A lot of people describe the Lovecraftian mythos as Cthulhu cannot wake up. If Cthulhu awakens from deepest relay and actually reemerges onto the world, that's it. Game, set, match. It's over. Lovecraft did not say that. In fact, actually, in the Call of Cthulhu at the ending, guess who shows up, and guess who gets awoken, and guess who's freed from relay. But here's the thing. Lovecraft himself commented how a big inspiration for that scene was actually the Odyssey and the Isle of the Cyclopses. In fact, several characters just drop dead in similar fashion to that, to what happens to the guys on the Isle of the Cyclops. But I'll paraphrase and get simple. At the end of it, it all comes down, there's one single survivor. He manages to get to the boat, and he is trying to sail away from relay, and he looks over his shoulder, and he can see Cthulhu is pursuing him. Cthulhu is chasing him into the water. This thing can swim. And there's this pivotal moment in the story where the character, he knows he's not going to outsail this giant monster. But he does have a boat. And so he makes the decision that he doesn't want to die tired. Screw it. He turns the boat around with the intention that whatever happens, happens. I'm going to leave a scar on this monster. And he doesn't just hit Cthulhu with a boat. He straight up goes through Cthulhu. Hits him right in his head. And it's kind of funny. He kind of pops. In the book, it describes it as like a needle piercing a membrane. And the boat literally goes through Cthulhu. And it is this overwhelming, horrible, stenchy gas. And the dude survives. And starts turning the boat so he doesn't crash into the beach on relay. And as he's pulling away, he can see Cthulhu trying to hold his head together lumbering back into Relay because he has been so critically wounded he has to retreat and heal. And here's the thing. For a nihilistic writer like H.P. Lovecraft, I would argue that is a profound positive message. Because supposedly nothing can stop Cthulhu. The elder gods could only temporarily imprison him. He literally has a fast line to the violent end of the universe. And some dude in a boat kicked his fucking ass and sent him crawling into a hole in the ground. I can't be the one who sees it. The whole key to defeating Cthulhu was not being afraid. He's going to catch my boat and kill me anyway. I'll die bravely and fight him. This, in my opinion, is a profoundly positive message about facing fear and courage. Now, yes, it's implied that the cult of Cthulhu will find this character and kill him for hurting their god, sure, but that's an afterthought. That's not the point. The point of it is that arguably the most important moment in the Lovecraftian mythos about the most important character can be summed up as face your fear. And a good result came of it. You know, and that's one of the things. It's like, so many people talk about Lovecraft and they don't know the first thing about him. I'm going to speak personally about someone I never met, I know, but I'm going to say it anyway. Lovecraft was a man who was dealing with a lot of pain. Mentally, emotionally, maybe even physically. And the problem is, you can't carry that pain inside you. It will come out. And that's why he was so resentful to people. That's why he was so bitter. That's why he was, yes, a bigot. You can't hold it in. You have to let it out somehow. But the funny thing is that if you actually read his works, if you try to understand this incredibly complicated man who was incredibly important, you'd be surprised how often people are dead wrong about him. And yeah, as we end tonight talking about not buff Cthulhu, that's what I'm going to call him now, the great flabby Cthulhu, you know, and we say goodnight and everything, you know, yeah, read a book. Read the works of Lovecraft and actually get to know this guy. Because the fact of the matter is, 90% of the shit people say about him online is dead wrong anyway. But anyhow, we'll see you next week, guys. I have been your host, Kristoff N. Chester. These are my wonderful doggo companions, Famine and Gluttony. We have the Bishop over in the corner.
Hi.
And we'll see you guys next week. So until then. Oh, wait, I forgot something. This weekend, we're going to the Curiosities and Oddities Expo. And I'm going to be there this time. Nothing on this planet's going to keep me from getting to that damn convention this time. So next week, we'll be talking about our expedition to the Curiosities and Oddities Expo. And who knows what we'll be talking about. It'll be a bit of a fun surprise. Hopefully I'll see you there, everybody. And remember, keep checking the shadows.